The villagers whispered every night about a stranger who walked beneath the moon without showing his face. They claimed that wherever he passed, dogs stopped barking, and even the wind seemed afraid to move. No one knew his name, where he came from, or why he always covered himself in a dark hood. Some believed he was a ghost, while others insisted he had once been a man cursed by forgotten spirits. The stranger never begged for food, never asked for water, and never entered anyone's home. At sunrise, he disappeared into the thick forest beyond the hills, and by dusk he returned to the dusty road with slow, measured steps. Children watched from behind cracked walls, daring each other to peek at the place where his face should have been. Every single child ran away screaming, claiming they saw only endless darkness beneath his hood. One evening the village chief ordered his strongest hunters to remove the stranger before fear destroyed the community. Armed with spears and torches, they surrounded him near the old baobab tree. The man stood perfectly still and raised neither hand nor weapon. As the hunters stepped closer, every torch suddenly went out at once, leaving only silence and darkness. When the flames returned moments later, the stranger had not moved an inch, yet every hunter had dropped his spear in terror. The following morning strange footprints appeared across the marketplace. They began in dry dust but ended on solid stone where no track should exist. The villagers followed them until they reached the stranger sitting quietly beside a river. Without lifting his head, he pointed toward the hills. Hours later, a violent landslide crashed exactly where he had pointed, burying an empty road that dozens would have traveled that day. Fear slowly mixed with gratitude. Rumors spread beyond neighboring villages. Some called him a guardian, sent by forgotten ancestors. Others believed he stole the faces of anyone who stared too long. Merchants avoided the roads after sunset, yet every traveler who secretly followed him reached home unharmed despite bandits prowling nearby. Nobody could explain how danger always seemed to vanish whenever the silent stranger appeared. An old storyteller approached him without fear and gently asked, "What should we call you?" The stranger remained silent for several minutes before answering with a calm voice that seemed to echo through the air. "Names belong to faces. I have neither." Those nearby felt chills race through their bodies because the voice sounded ancient and young at exactly the same time. That night thunder shook the earth. Villagers awoke to discover every mirror in their homes covered by unexplained cracks, although none had fallen or been touched. The stranger wandered through the empty streets while lightning flashed behind him. For a brief instant someone claimed they saw a human face under the hood, but when the lightning faded there was only darkness again, as though the image had never existed. By the next week, fear had settled over the village like a heavy fog. People no longer gathered outside after sunset, and even the drummers refused to beat their drums once darkness arrived. Yet the hooded stranger continued his silent walks through the empty streets, never harming anyone, never asking for anything, and never explaining why he had come. The more peaceful he appeared, the more terrified the villagers became, because they could not understand a man who seemed untouched by hunger, exhaustion, or loneliness. Every morning, mysterious marks appeared in the dust exactly where he had walked, forming symbols that vanished before noon as if the earth itself wished to hide them. One night, distant screams echoed from the forest. Brave men rushed toward the sound with lanterns, expecting to find wounded travelers or wild animals. Instead, they discovered broken trees, deep claw marks across giant rocks, and abandoned tools scattered across the ground, but not a single body. Standing calmly in the center of the destruction was the faceless stranger. His cloak was untouched by dust or blood. Without speaking, he simply pointed toward the darkness beyond the trees. Moments later, an enormous shadow moved between the branches, letting out a roar so terrible that every rescuer fled in panic while the stranger remained perfectly still. The following morning, people noticed something impossible. Every destroyed tree had somehow returned to its original place, standing tall as if it had never fallen. Only the claw marks on the rocks remained, proving that the night's horror had truly happened. The villagers argued endlessly about what they had witnessed. Some accused the stranger of summoning monsters, while others believed he alone had driven the unseen beast away. Through all the accusations and fearful whispers, the hooded man neither defended himself nor denied anything. He simply sat beside the old well, staring into the darkness hidden beneath his own hood. A violent dust storm arrived without warning, covering the sky until day looked like night. Roofs shook, market stalls collapsed, and frightened families hid inside their homes. In the middle of the storm, the stranger climbed the tallest hill overlooking the village. Witnesses later swore that the wind split around his body instead of touching him. As he raised one empty hand toward the swirling clouds, the storm slowly changed direction and swept harmlessly into the distant plains. When people climbed the hill to thank him, they found only footprints leading to a cliff where no human could have safely descended. Despite all these miracles, one question haunted everyone more than any other. What was hidden beneath the hood? Several curious young men secretly followed him into the forest, determined to uncover the truth. They watched him kneel before a perfectly still lake under the moonlight. Slowly, he reached for the edge of his hood as though preparing to remove it. Before they could see beneath it, the lake suddenly reflected dozens of identical hooded figures standing all around him, though the forest itself remained empty. Terrified beyond words, the spies ran away and never spoke of the vision again except in whispers. Days later, traders from another kingdom arrived carrying news of abandoned towns where entire populations had vanished overnight. Every survivor described seeing a traveler whose face could not be seen, but none agreed on whether he brought disaster or prevented it. The stories contradicted one another so completely that no one knew what to believe. Hearing these tales, the villagers looked at the stranger with growing uncertainty. Was he leading destruction from place to place, or following it in a desperate attempt to stop it before it spread? Late one evening, the stranger finally spoke more than a single sentence. Without turning toward anyone, he quietly warned, "Before the seventh sunrise, something buried beneath this village will awaken." He offered no explanation and refused every question shouted after him. Panic spread instantly. Families packed their belongings, elders prayed through the night, and warriors sharpened every weapon they owned. Yet the stranger did nothing except continue his silent patrol through the sleeping streets, as though he alone knew exactly when the hidden danger would reveal itself. The first sunrise passed in uneasy silence. The second brought strange vibrations beneath the earth that rattled cooking pots and cracked the walls of old huts. By the third morning, animals refused to enter the village, circling its borders before fleeing into the wilderness. The hooded man walked calmly through the panic, leaving behind footprints that glowed faintly for a few seconds before disappearing. Everyone watched him from a distance, convinced he knew the truth but unwilling to reveal it. The mystery surrounding him became heavier than the fear itself. On the fourth night, a deep rumbling echoed from beneath the ancient marketplace. The ground split open just enough to reveal an endless black void beneath the stones. Villagers gathered in horror, expecting flames or monsters to emerge, but instead they heard soft whispers calling each person by name. Some stepped forward as if hypnotized, ready to jump into the darkness. Before anyone could fall, the faceless stranger stood between the people and the crack. The whispers stopped instantly, replaced by a silence so complete that even the insects vanished. The village elders begged the stranger to explain himself, but he remained motionless for a long time before finally speaking. The thing below does not fear weapons. It feeds on fear, doubt, and forgotten promises. His words confused everyone. If the creature fed on fear, then the terror already spreading through the village was making it stronger. That realization struck the people harder than any attack could have. They tried to stay calm, but every nervous glance and whispered rumor only deepened the invisible danger waiting beneath their feet. As the sixth sunrise approached, shadows began moving independently of the objects that cast them. Trees leaned one way while their shadows crawled another. Empty baskets cast the silhouettes of snakes, and harmless birds flew overhead while their shadows looked like giant beasts. Children cried, adults locked themselves indoors, and no one dared light a fire after sunset. Only the stranger continued his lonely patrol, his own shadow remaining perfectly still beneath him as though anchored by an unseen force. Before dawn on the seventh day, the earth exploded with a deafening roar. The ancient crack widened across the center of the village, swallowing abandoned carts, broken fences, and towering trees. Thick black mist poured upward and spread across the streets like living smoke. Panic erupted as people ran in every direction. The stranger did not retreat. He stepped directly toward the opening until he stood only a few feet from the endless darkness. Then, for the first time since arriving, he slowly lowered his hood. The villagers stared in disbelief. Beneath the hood there was still no face, only a swirling field of stars, light, and endless night, as though the universe itself existed where human features should have been. The black mist recoiled from the sight beneath the hood. It twisted violently, shrieking without a voice, and retreated back toward the giant crack in the ground. The villagers watched in stunned silence as invisible forces collided around the stranger, causing dust, stones, and broken branches to rise into the air. Though the power surrounding him seemed overwhelming, he never moved from his place. His cloak whipped wildly in the wind while the impossible darkness beneath his hood shone brighter than the rising sun. When the battle ended, the crack in the earth sealed itself as though it had never existed. The mist disappeared, the whispers faded, and birds cautiously returned to the trees. The stranger quietly pulled his hood back into place, hiding the impossible vision once more. Without waiting for thanks or celebration, he turned toward the distant forest and began walking away. The villagers wanted answers, but none dared stop him. As he disappeared into the morning fog, they noticed one final mystery. Despite the soft mud left by the night's chaos, he left no footprints at all. After the stranger vanished into the forest, the village did not celebrate. Instead, silence returned in a heavier form than before. People tried to rebuild broken stalls and repair cracked walls, but every nail they hammered sounded like a distant echo of the underground roar. No one spoke openly about what they had seen beneath the hood, yet everyone dreamed the same dream that night. A sky full of stars staring back at them from a human shape. Even the elders who once doubted the stranger now refused to say he was gone, as if speaking it would summon something worse. 3 nights later, a hunter traveling beyond the forest line claimed he saw him again. The stranger stood at the edge of a cliff where the wind never stopped blowing. But this time, something was different. The hunter swore the forest behind him bent inward, like reality itself was leaning toward him. When the hunter called out, the man did not turn. Instead, the air around him distorted, and faint shapes of faces appeared and dissolved inside the wind, as though memories were being erased in real time. The hunter returned to the village, trembling, unable to sleep or eat. He kept repeating one sentence. He is not hiding a face. He is hiding everything that ever had a face. The villagers dismissed him as traumatized, but that night more people began hearing whispers inside their own thoughts. Not voices from outside, but memories speaking back, memories they never remembered living. Fear returned, but now it was no longer about the stranger. It was about what they themselves might become if the darkness returned. On the 7th day after his disappearance, a child found a black cloth near the old baobab tree. It looked exactly like the stranger's hood, but when the child touched it, the fabric dissolved into tiny lights that floated upward before vanishing. At the same moment, every mirror in the village briefly showed the same image, a hooded figure standing behind each person, perfectly still, even though no one was there when they turned around. Panic returned instantly, but the stranger himself was nowhere to be found. That night, the village experienced total darkness, not the absence of light, but the absence of direction. People could not tell where the sky ended or the ground began. In that endless confusion, something spoke again from beneath the earth. It did not call for fear this time, but for recognition. The stranger's voice echoed inside everyone's mind simultaneously. I was never inside the hood. The hood was inside you. No one understood, but something deep within them began to remember fragments of truths they had never lived. By morning, the world returned to normal. Birds sang, the sun rose, and the ground was solid once again. Yet the villagers were no longer the same. Each person carried a faint shadow behind them that moved independently for a split second before sinking again. No one dared speak about it. The stranger was never seen again in physical form, but whenever someone stood alone for too long, they felt a silent presence behind them, patient and watching, not threatening, just waiting. Weeks passed, but the village never fully returned to what it was. Life continued, farming, trading, laughter, but something subtle had shifted beneath everything. People began noticing that when they told lies, their shadows grew heavier and darker for a moment before returning to normal. When they told the truth, the shadows almost seemed lighter, as if the ground itself was reacting to honesty. The memory of the faceless man was no longer spoken aloud, yet it shaped every choice they made in silence. One evening, the village blacksmith found something impossible inside his furnace. Among the glowing coal and molten metal was a perfectly intact hood, untouched by fire. When he tried to remove it with tongs, the entire forge went silent. The flames did not flicker, the air stopped moving, and every sound vanished. Then, for a single heartbeat, the blacksmith saw himself standing in the place of the hooded stranger, watching the world from behind an endless absence where a face should have been. The hood was taken to the elders, but no one dared touch it for long. Each person who came near it began remembering things they never lived, walking through forests that never existed, standing at cliffs that had no end, hearing whispers inside storms. The elders finally ordered it to be buried beneath the baobab tree where the stranger had first been seen. But when they dug the hole, they found it already buried there, as if it had always been waiting. That night, the earth trembled gently instead of violently, like something turning in its sleep. Every villager dreamed the same dream again, but this time it was different. They were not watching the hooded man, they were him. They felt the weight of the hood, the absence of a face, the endless pressure of seeing everything but belonging nowhere. When they woke up, many refused to look into water or mirrors for fear of what they might see staring back. A young girl, the only one unafraid, began visiting the baobab tree every morning. She claimed she could hear soft breathing beneath the roots, slow and patient, like something alive but resting. One day, she spoke into the soil and asked, "Are you gone?" The wind stopped immediately. Then from deep underground, a voice answered, not from one direction, but from everywhere at once. "I never arrived. I only became visible." After that day, the village began to change in impossible ways. Paths sometimes led to places they should not reach. A road that ended at a river one day would lead to a desert the next. People stopped arguing about it because reality itself no longer stayed consistent enough to be questioned. Yet through all of it, the village remained safe. No raids, no beasts, no disasters, only quiet, shifting uncertainty held together by something unseen and watching.